Well, hello and welcome to Cape Ann ARTWaves. This is our 2022 season. We're 3/4 of the way through the year, and ARTWaves actually started in March of 2020. It's a 1623 studios here in Gloucester, Massachusetts member program where we interview artists in depth to find out about their working lives here on Cape Ann as artists. My name is Jacqueline Ganem DeFalco. I co-host and co-produce this show with Christine Fisher, who is usually on the alternate week. We're very excited to announce that ARTWaves has received over 14,000 views on YouTube and also many on Facebook, and of course, many on Channel 12 since we began. And we've interviewed over 70 artists for this show, so it's very exciting. We wanted to thank, first of all, our incredible sponsors who make this show possible. Prince Insurance Agency, M. Christine Fisher, visual artist, Compass Realty, Martha Anger, real estate advisor, Protective Packaging Inc., and the Common Crow Natural Market. They have been stellar in supporting our show, along with incredible musicians who gave us original music, Steve Lacey and Pat Verga, and then our marketing partners, C Arts and 1623 Studios. Today, I am going to introduce to you a woman whose career is storied, in my opinion. I think that's the best way to describe Pat Collins. Before I read you her bio, I'd like Pat to say hello to our audience. Pat, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. It is my pleasure because Pat has just blown my mind with what she shared with me over the last week as we've gotten to know each other better. So Pat is not a native of Cape Ann, but she was born in Los Angeles, California, growing up with a highly influential mother who encouraged creativity in all forms. And Pat even acted in the radio industry as a child. And you'll notice she has this incredible voice. So she was able to, right from the start, take advantage of her beautiful voice. After trying her hand at visual arts in high school and initially at UCLA and the Immaculate Art College, where she studied with the now famous Corita Kent, Pat switched to USC and decided to focus on her other love, writing, and graduated with a degree in English literature. While in California, she studied art briefly at the famous Choinard Art Institute, which later became the California Institute of Art, thanks to the Disney brothers who oversaw its merger with the LA Conservatory of Music. So there's a little history for all of us. After getting married, Pat moved to the East Coast, specifically to Lexington, Massachusetts, where she and her husband, Wallace, raised 5 children. Nearby, she was able to take evening classes at the Decordova Museum School and spent time at Brandeis as a special student. Pat will share a lot more about this. It's very interesting. She and Wallace summered and eventually moved full-time to Gloucester's Wingaersheek Beach. Pat also began writing children's books in the 70s while moving around the Northeast. She taught life drawing at the Worcester Art Museum, joined the faculty of what's called the Low-Res Creative Writing MFA program at Lesley University in 2004. And I learned from her recently that that is a unique kind of fast-paced program for people to get their degrees. She was widowed in 2016 after 62 years of marriage, which means that Pat has actually had quite a rich life as a wonderful married woman and a mother of 5. And she now lives in Rockport, where she had briefly operated a working gallery here called The Pen and Brush. Pat has been involved with most of the local art associations over the years and was briefly on our Cape Ann Artisans Tour, which is where we first met. Pat has had many exciting current art and writing projects that she's going to share with us throughout the interview. She has been working on a number of novels for adults, is pulling together a memoir of coming of age years in old Hollywood. How exciting is that? A heyday of radio. You may know her writing from her blogs on WBUR's Cognoscenti, or have seen her illustrations for the book Schooner about building of the Lannon. So with that, I'm going to introduce Pat. That's just like tidbits about her because she's totally amazing. So welcome again, Pat.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So you've had a fascinating early childhood that you've shared with me, from the heart of Hollywood to later moving to the Northeast. And I'm really interested in some of your early memories. We're going to put up on the screen because we mentioned that you were a childhood radio star. So we're going to show a picture of you early on. You're in front of this fascinating instrument. Tell us a little bit about like where this creativity came from, and the kinds of things that you did that kind of got you going as a child.
Well, I think we were always encouraged to write. We had journals and draw. We had all kinds of equipment for that. My mother was very creative. She made puppets, and we had a puppet show for a number of years when we were very small that we took to orphanages and hospitals and things like that. I would say it was just something that I did. That's the way I was brought up. You woke up each morning and wondered what you were going to make. So that was my early childhood. And at some point, my sister started taking piano lessons. I wanted to learn the piano, and my mother said, no, that was her instrument. So I had to pick something else. And she really didn't have any knowledge of music or instruments. And somehow she landed on the marimba. And of course I didn't. I was only 5. So I didn't have any idea what it was, but I played that for years. And we took
it looks like a xylophone, right? That's what
it's like a xylophone, but it's
right.
much bigger and it has tubes. It's more resonant.
Very interesting.
A lot of mariachi bands and things like that, although it has come into the classical shows that I've seen recently. So it is being used for other things.
Before we move on to talk about some of your other creative outlets, I think you really have to share with us, because it was so unique, a little bit about your childhood, because that would have been in, let's see, the 20s or so.
No.
30s.
I spent most of my childhood in Hollywood. And we moved to Hollywood when I was 7, and that would be beginning of the end of the 30s.
Okay, end of the 30s. I was off by a decade.
It was the end of the Depression, actually. And that's why we bought this house, because it was being sacrificed. Nobody could sell houses. And it was a big estate in a conclave of homes that had been begun by movie moguls, like Cecil B. DeMille. He had 3 houses there. W.C. Fields rented a place, and Deanna Durbin was just catty corner from us. There were Chaplin had built a house originally there. He was one of the ones who planned the area. It was private. It was right smack dab in the middle of Hollywood, up against the observatory, really, in the Los Feliz area, but it still is private. It's the people who live there have to, take care of their own roads and that sort of thing. It has gates now. It didn't have gates when I was growing up there, but it was a fabulous place to grow up.
And I think you said to me that your mother, who had this incredible creative soul, planted 150 rose bushes. Is that right?
Oh, actually, the 150 rose bushes were there. That's when we bought the house.
Okay.
It had big fern gardens full of calla lilies, and it was the garden was what intrigued her more than anything else, because she loved to do flower arrangements. It was a beautiful place, and it was also a very interesting place. You were always seeing movie stars coming and going, and
yeah, it had to be. Oh, can't wait to hear more. And I know that that's going to be part of your memoir that you're writing. So we know your creativity has many legs, and it's kind of which came first, the painting or the writing. And then, how did you eventually land on these children's books, which we're going to show a couple of book covers as you're speaking. But I think there were some interesting things that happened early on with your mother that you might want to mention here in terms of the, a little bit more about how you wound up eventually writing.
Oh, well, I think the picture you showed of me with my marimba, that was an amateur show. And I had to introduce myself. And at the time, I guess I ran all my words together. I was 9 or 8 or 9. And my mother said, you can't, you have to have drama lessons. You can't speak like that. So she got me a drama teacher, and the drama teacher was a radio actress. And after a while, she just said, you can do this. And I was good with voices and with dialects and things like that. And in those days, they didn't, of course, have internet. They had something called the Radio Artist Telephone Exchange that not only took your calls, but they had a book with your picture in it, and it listed your age ranges. There was one show I did where they would sometimes have me play 3 different parts, because I could be the baby, I could be the little girl, and I could be the brother. So that was what you were known for, your different parts or your different dialects.
Mm-hmm. But then there was the whole journaling that you mentioned. I mean, I think that was pretty fascinating. You may want to share that with us.
That was when we were younger, and we traveled a lot. My mother was from Chicago. My mother and father were from Chicago, and they loved to go to all the national parks. And we traveled around in this limousine. There weren't such things as station wagons then. So our limousine had jump seats, and she'd put those down and put blankets over it. So we had a whole back seat that we could play in and work in. And we also journaled. We had to write about our trips, and we had to, it wasn't that we had to, we really liked to do that.
Right.
And when I was too young to write, I would draw pictures, and my mother would write what I told her to put next to it. So I would say that the drawing came before the writing.
Well, you have a wonderful series of memories that started so early on. I'm just so impressed that that's so clear to you. And, I kind of wondered, did that help you when you wrote some of these children's books? We're going to show The Daughter of Winter and the Deer Watch book covers here. And I'm just curious, did you go back to any childhood memories when you were writing?
Actually, I started writing children's books because of my own children, I think.
Okay.
I would have ideas. And one of my sisters, I didn't mention to you, she's quite a famous children's book author. History. She's now dead, but she won 3 Edgar Allan Poe awards for her work. And so I was always sort of in her shadow, that area. But it wasn't that I hadn't thought of it on my own. I wanted to do this, but I had thought that I would illustrate all my picture books, but was told at the beginning that I didn't have an illustrator's style. I just kept painting on one side and writing on the other. I had illustrated one book for someone else, and then I didn't put my own paintings into a book until I did Schooner.
Oh, great. So that's a little bit later on.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too, before we, I think you had this gift early on, and then you studied art a little bit in high school, you said, but then when you had a unique college situation because you were also working, right, at such a young age. And then you run into this person, Corita, who later on becomes, much before this time, right? She became very popular later on. Tell me what happened in that situation with her.
Well, I actually entered Immaculate Heart in the middle of the year. I had been at UCLA. I think I told you I was 16. I really wasn't ready for college in any way, and UCLA scared me. So I went back to the arm of my high school, which was Immaculate Heart, when it was a college up on the hill. And she taught, Sister Corita taught art there. And for some reason, she really was not, I didn't really do very much there. We just had Art 101 or something like that. She actually taught me sewing.
There you go.
She just didn't encourage me. And that school was too small. So I ended up at USC. And it was interesting because she was going there for her master's at the time. And I would see her on campus. And by then I was majoring in English and minoring in art, and I was able to take life drawing classes there. So
okay, so it's interesting because for those people that don't know her, you told me she's the one that painted the gas tanks south of Boston. That's what she did. So she became kind of a pop art figure doing,
well, I don't know whether it was pop art, but everything that she did had writing on it of some kind. She always had a message. silk screen, I think was what was her medium,
Okay. But
basically.
far outside the traditional bonds of nuns, I would say at
Oh,
that time.
she
Right?
left the convent. She left the convent
Yeah.
about 10 years, I think, after I knew
Yeah.
her.
Well, that's pretty amazing right there. So you mentioned life drawing. So let's pick up on that because, okay, so now we'll advance forward a little bit. You sort of said to me a number of times that life drawing is where you landed as your initial interest when you got back to art after college and after everything else. And then you're married. And in the meantime, somehow you had 5 children and moved to Lexington, Massachusetts. Doesn't leave a lot of time for your own art, does it?
Well, that's why I credit the Decordova Museum School with a lot of my training, because I would put the kids to bed, my husband would be there, and it wasn't far from where I lived, so I'd go there for night school. I went there for a long time.
Let's show some of your life drawings, some of your figures here. I think that you obviously had a gift, because these are just fantastic. I'm going to show the rose complete here, and also Eileen. Do you want to mention anything about those?
Eileen is a portrait.
Okay.
I was also doing portraits, and when we lived in Jersey, that's what I did pretty exclusively.
Okay.
Because I didn't have a life drawing group for much of the time. And the other one, the La Rose Complete, was on sandpaper, and I did that in the workshop at Rockport Art Association.
Oh, great. We've had to mix these up because obviously some of this work was done so long ago, but we just want to show a little bit about your style. And you probably don't have a lot of your original life drawing pictures.
I do have a lot of them, but I don't have JPEGs of them.
Yes, right, exactly. So
slides. At the time I took slides, but I haven't transferred them yet.
But why don't you share with us a little bit about the tools you use, your process, because you have a very specific style that evolved that, I want you to talk about, but even why you chose the direction that you chose at that time.
Well, I always loved to draw. I think that was the main thing, and I still do. And I worked in oil for quite a while when I was beginning. I studied with Sidney Hurwitz, and I was doing oils then. And actually, when I was at Brandeis, was doing oils. But with King Coffin, who was teaching at Decordova, he had us use pastels one time, and I found them really, really challenging, and I really didn't like them. But they sort of gnawed at me because I liked what they produced. So I made it a mission, more or less, to learn to use them, and studied myself, just going to the Pastel Society in New York to see their shows, and with books and things. And I found it, for me, with a family around, it was an easier medium to put away and take out. Oils was just too difficult. I mean, because at that time I didn't have a studio at the beginning when I was first painting. I was just either working in a little room in the basement or in the kitchen. When we were in the beach house, I sometimes just did it on the floor while the kids were playing around. I have a piece that I just hung recently. It's an old one, but it's of the marsh. It's a triptych. And I remember doing that on the floor and trying to put the 3 pieces together. I really didn't have a designated space for a long, long time.
And yet somehow that creativity pushed through.
Well, it was just something I did, because I think it was because of my mother. It was like we always were doing something creative, and that was my life. And I had to do that. That was just it. That was normal.
Right. You mentioned that when you were in your 50s, that was really the time that was your most productive period, where you did a lot of life drawings. And, there's some, you talked just now about, working with pastels. But you also started to change your style a little bit, and we're going to show Hattie's China here, and maybe you can discuss a little bit about your evolution at that time as you got to be more intense. I imagine your kids were getting older by then, and you had a little bit more time, right?
Well, my kids were very spaced out. There was 17 years between two of them. So I was still at home, but I had more of a studio at that time. I think that was why I could do more. I did some of the chairs series there, not all of it, but some of the larger work I could do there. So, but Hattie's China was my grandmother's China. I didn't even know I would be doing rocks at that point, but I was dealing with anything like any solid shape I was interested in, and putting that all together, and shadows were important to me at that time. So important transition, actually.
Out of sort of the human figure,
Yeah,
into these inanimate objects,
right.
right? The two ladies on the train, I think you mentioned, was a special portrait that ended up in the Courier Museum. Is that correct?
Well, it was shown in a New Hampshire Art Association show at the Courier. They had their shows there every year. Usually I was in them, and that one won a significant prize one year.
Okay.
And that was done actually in, I was going from photographs, because I had taken it in the train to Calif from, we were on a Nashua, New Hampshire symphony tour. I was singing with them at the time, and it was a European tour. So and I did some other things that were figurative, but they had that feeling of games, someone playing games.
And I think you just mentioned rocks. So this would probably be a good time to introduce that transition that went from people to still objects, but then you seem to find a home in these rocks, right? So talk about that. Why was that?
After we retired, we rebuilt the house at the beach house. So I had a studio, and I was fascinated, and had been for years, with the rocks on Wingaersheek Beach. So honestly, I was doing portraits of the rocks.
There you go.
And I learned later that Philip Perlstein, who's a famous artist of the female figure, started out with rocks and moved to women. And then I more or less started out with women and moved to rocks. So sometimes friends and even my husband have seen body parts in my rocks, but I'm not conscious that they put them there.
Right.
But it's all solid shapes. It's just, I like to work with depth and heft, I would have to say. I like the feeling of, I'm doing an abstract right now that has depth and heft. I mean, that's all I could say about it. It's not a flat piece. It has movement, and you go back and forth in it. So
which is a perfect segue, because now we're going to talk about your current work. I just, I wanted to jump into your current work, because first the painting, but then we got to flip over to the writing, because you have so many exciting things going on at the same time. So just continue and talk about how you evolved from, and I'm going to show first to the two pieces you shared with us that are now part of the Cape Ann Museum, Time and Tides. And I don't know sequentially where those were, but they definitely have rocks,
they're
the center of them, right? And then we can show some work that you're working on now, which is the same theme, but very different.
I think the color selection is different. The palette is very different. And I honestly wasn't that aware of it until I sent those to you.
There you go.
Together, I wasn't aware what I was doing. I mean, I didn't realize that my palette had changed that much.
But also the movement you were just talking about, right? I mean, there's a lot more movement in the current work, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Right. And there's lava. That's another part of your current.
I had just taken a trip to Costa Rica with one of my daughters, and we stayed at the base a volcano, and they had pieces of volcanic rock in the lobby, and I photographed those and was working from those. So I consider those sort of abstractions more than, but they are a thing. They are from lava.
Well, there's some amazing things. And share with us a little bit about weed, pebble, and rock.
Well, that's rocks again, but it's a
Okay.
different part of it's on the outer harbor
Mhm.
below the boulevard. And those rocks all have what I call beards on them. Most of them, they have a lot of seaweed. There's a lot of little pebbles around them. It's a total different kind of landscape, really. And I've been abstracting that in a way, but it still has, I'm trying to get the essence of that rock. And it was
Mhm.
interesting because someone bought the second one, and he didn't know where I had painted it from, and he said it looked like the place that he loved, which was at Stageport Park. So I nailed it, I guess.
No, that's great. That's great. So, I think, in terms of your current work, you've got, you've got some incredible, pieces that are in your collection and some that have gone to other collections. But what would be your goal right now for the painting side of your current work? What are you looking to do at this stage?
I would, of course, I'd like to sell some of them, but I also would like to donate some to buildings or, places that don't normally have artwork like this, or that would want, like one of my daughters is a physician, and she works at Brandeis, and she has many of my chair paintings there.
Mm.
In the medical building, where they've never had paintings before. So I'm thinking along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we definitely need to make sure that people know that, because, at this stage, we got to make sure that they get into a good homes. I want to talk about, sort of looking back now on your entire sort of connection to the arts community here, because you've been on Cape Ann now for a long time, living in Rockport, and you actually have your DNA out there in a number of places, both from a painter's perspective and also from a writer's perspective. So I want to bring up again these two pieces from the Cape Ann Museum, Time and Tides, because I know that is certainly one of the exciting things for you, obviously, is to have that. And what else? Talk a little bit about some of the other things that are important to you, that are kind of, when you look back on your time here as an artist, what stands out in your mind?
Oh, artist or writer, or both?
Both. I consider writers artists. I'm just saying your whole sort of creative journey here in Cape Ann.
A couple of my novels, I think I really loved doing. One was Hidden Voices, the Orphan Musicians of Venice. And I went there and really retraced Vivaldi's steps, and had to learn a lot about music. I thought I knew quite a bit, but there was a lot more I needed to know. A lot of things I didn't know, but it was a big learning experience. And putting that all together and developing these three characters, or these three voices, was really, really a wonderful experience. And then I did another book, which was a verse novel called The Fattening Hut. And that dealt with a very sensitive situation, but I think I did it well for older children, so they could understand. It was female circumcision. And it was, I went to Anguilla. I picked that island as my setting. I always found, if I was doing a historical novel, I do go wherever it is. And that was true. Daughter of Winter, it was set in Essex, because that's where I had done schooner, and I used a lot of that research for Daughter of Winter, and it was set in 1849 when the shipbuilding was at its height.
Right, right. And you were actually, when you were working in schooner, I think you mentioned to me that was, you were observing a lot in that area at the time.
Oh yeah. I mean, there was, I had wanted to set a book around that graveyard there next to the old shipbuilding museum. That used to be their old school.
Ah.
So a lot, this Daughter of Wind was set definitely in that period, and that
as I'm speaking with you about all this, what's occurring to me, Pat, is that there's this like 360-degree creative process for you. You know, you have this, you know, sort of visual look at everything that, and then you sort of internalize it and you write about it, and then you go back to the visual. I mean, it's, and then add into that your love of music, which we really didn't even talk about. So
bring that up.
you're just like, you're a true creative soul on all counts.
Well, I do have to credit my parents for that, because that was the life. They kept telling us they were giving us a perfect childhood, and for much of that was true. It later became a little difficult, but when I was young, it was it was also at the beginning of World War II and at the end of the Depression, which was not a good time for a lot of people.
Especially in the art world, right? I mean, pretty tough. And then The Quiet Woman was also something that relates directly to our local history.
Ray Bentley, who used to live in Rockport, he had been an editor at Beacon Press, and when he retired, he decided to publish local poets' work. So there is a series called the Folly Cove Poets, and I was one of those, and Ruth Masson was one, and Charlotte Gordon. I think they have the books, or some of the books, in the store at the Cape Ann Museum.
Great. Well, this is the time to celebrate. Well, we're celebrating the Folly Cove designers right now at the Cape Ann Museum. So,
well, that cover on that book was from one of Hattie's China.
Oh, great.
Pictures. So
that's great. We'll see again, 360, right? So, all right, I'm going to flip to yet another one of your projects. And I don't know how a woman can do all these projects at the same time, how anyone could do these projects at the same time, at any age, let alone at this stage of your life, that you still have so much going on. But aging and the creative process seems like an appropriate topic for you to be focused on. This is your interviews with other artists going through the process. So just reflecting on that, tell me a little bit about what you've learned.
I've learned that we're all sort of in the same boat. One of our main concerns is how to archive our work. Another is actually being able to do the work, being in a situation where we have room to do the work still. Sometimes if you have like a plein air painter, they can go anywhere and do it, but a studio painter has a problem with that. I've also learned that most of us still feel, when we approach a blank piece of paper, that this is a challenge we're not sure we are up to. And it's starting at the beginning, always, all over again. By the time we've reached this age, or any older age, you're used to rejection. And you're used to success, but you know that success follows rejection. And when you're younger, you don't know that. And it makes a big difference. I don't know. I was looking over some of the interviews yesterday and trying to think. They're all different. They all have it. I find that some of them gravitate to smaller work because it's easier to manage. But some of them don't. They continue, you know, and often they have physical handicaps that are very difficult to overcome, but they do it because they have to. They just, and what are you going to do if this is part of you? You have to find a way to accommodate it. I don't work as often as I used to, or on as many things as I used to.
Mm.
You're slower down, but you're still thinking about it. And I also talk a lot in some of the essays about fallow periods and how sometimes you feel that you're not getting anywhere because you're not working, but you're observing and you are changing. And if you go back to your work, you'll find that it's better or different.
I'll tell you, those are incredible words of wisdom, Pat, for people, artists of any age that want to stay connected to their creativity. And I think the very fact that you can be creative will keep you going from everything you've shared with me. And from you are living that example every single day. So I am just so impressed with your energy, your incredible positive attitude, and all that you've done in your life. And I'm just so glad that we can share this. So while we're on that topic, I'm going to flash up a screen of all the different ways that you can find Pat, who is extremely findable. But out of all the ways to contact you, email or on social media, what is your preferred way for people to find you, to get in touch with you about your art?
Well, they can just go to my website, and there's on the contact page, there's a place to put a message and it will come to me.
All right, great. Well, I've done that. And so I know that you respond to those messages,
Right.
And you're very adept at all this crazy computer stuff. And so I'm very appreciative of that. And of you and all that you've done. So I think we're going to wrap up today, and really thank you for your time, your wisdom, all your contributions to Cape Ann, and just want to give you the energy to just keep going. And
Such a privilege, Jackie. I just appreciate it so much.
Oh, it's just great.
Wonderful for me.
So to our audience, you can view Cape Ann ARTWaves on the 1623 YouTube playlist for Cape Ann ARTWaves. And also you will see us on Facebook and on Twitter, featured in the CArts Weekly e-blast. You can sign up at carts.org for that. And of course, over the next couple of weeks, you'll see this episode on Channel 12, which is our local station here on Cape Ann. So once again, thank you so much to our audience. Thank you to Pat, and thank you to 1623 Studios for hosting us at Cape Ann ARTWaves, and all of our sponsors.